Welcome to another podcast episode, everybody. Today we'll be talking about the four Avengers movies, which is kind of like a surprising thing since I don't really cover the MCU that much. Then again, I don't cover the DCU that much either. But yeah, why don't we get started? So, the first Avengers movie was massive hype back in 2012. Essentially, it was meant to be a massive, massive reunion for all the characters we saw in the past as they're pretty much teaming up for the first time. And when I say reunion, I more so mean the fact that all these characters we saw before are going to pretty much stick together for the first time we've seen. And, we had ourselves like films that depicted massive teams like X-Men and Watchmen. But Avengers was unique for movies in that it gave us multiple established heroes teaming up for one big adventure. And at the time, I was excited for it because I saw the other MCU movies. I was very happy with how they turned out at the time. I was excited for the rest of the MCU back then. And to see all this sort of stuff going on with the Marvel Cinematic Universe felt big. It felt exciting. It felt like it was something that never happened before. Fast forward to today, and I think the movie holds up okay-ish. The thing that kind of stuck out to me the most is just how the way the film was, shot. The weird thing is just how televised it all looked. The MCU itself gets criticized for the way the cinematography works. And to its credit, it was an earlier film. But I can't really defend it that much because I will be honest that the other MCU movies look much better than the first Avengers movie. Because mostly just the coloring itself, like the color grading was abysmal. People complain about how Man of Steel or BVS looked at the color grading, yet I think this looks infinitely worse. Those two were intentionally meant to have a specific style to them, whereas the Avengers felt more like it was shot for TV. And then we get to things like the combat itself, which ranged from pretty solid, like with the Hulk stuff, to alright with Captain America and whatnot, to mediocre with Black Widow. I just think like the combat we saw with Black Widow from Iron Man 2 holds up better than what we got with her in the first Avengers movie. And the other thing that kind of feels weird is just when you're watching videos on YouTube, you kind of don't get a sense of like what the aspect ratio is supposed to be. Like when you're watching your videos on a phone, usually you look at the screen and it kind of shows the either like a fully maxed out or not quite filled in screen. I think, for the most part, you have, like, those top and bottoms, and those, like, black bars on the top and bottom, I meant to say. And, look at the screen, and sometimes the movie will have, like, the black bars for the top and bottom portions of the screen, and those give off a more movie aesthetic look to everything. Like, is it supposed to be like that, or is it supposed to be 16:9 widescreen? Because it's kind of inconsistent, especially when you're watching movie clips that try to go for the HD approach. And usually the aspect ratio is not the same from video to video. Maybe they changed it, I'm not sure. But I don't really like how inconsistent it can get, if we're being honest. Apart from that, we also have to deal with things like the characterizations. I think the way the characters were set up for the first few movies before this film were done up pretty well. But to be honest, some of them do feel a little simplified to make the movies feel a little easier. Because I'm sure not everyone's likely watched the first Iron Man movie by the time this film came out. It's been about 4 years. I mean, yes, you could have seen it on TV. But say you're watching the first, this is your first ever superhero movie. You've never seen anything else before. You haven't seen Hulk. You haven't seen either of the first two Iron Man movies. Not even Captain America or Thor. So, in terms of how the characters were transferred from their last adventure to the Avengers movie, Iron Man itself felt a little more simplified, possibly because his stuff was a little more mature in terms of his own films. I think they kind of dumbed it down or toned it down a bit for everything after this movie. Like since then, things got a little more simplified. Kind of less and less references of his more drunk, like naturalistic or drunk-like characteristics, or like I think they were meant to say just like him being an alcoholic. Like I think pretty much him being redeemed to some extent. Like he was starting to become less and less alcoholic, which was understandable. Other things like possibly just the way his humor was. I mean, he was kind of like a bit of a smartass, but they toned it up much, much more. And I think after the first Avengers movie, they started to go at this route where it's like they have to cut to the humor over and over again. Which I guess they're trying to do for the audience, but at the same time, it kind of got a little tedious. Especially in other films where it's just nothing but the comedy that matters. Yeah, that's just me, though. Then again, I'm not the only person that criticizes the MCU for having too much humor. After that, we get ourselves the Hulk's transition. Since he was not seen since the first Incredible Hulk movie, we pretty much get the gist of it by now. You know, he was recast. Originally played by Edward Norton. Bruce Banner is now played by Mark Ruffalo. It's a major difference in terms of portrayal. Like, Edward Norton felt more like a proper like guy that's been involved in the mid 2000s movies. Like you get a sense that he would be in like a movie like Transformers or Edge of Tomorrow or iRobot. Whereas Mark Ruffalo feels more like it's him trying to homage a character from Jurassic Park, which is kind of like a neat thing. You know, it kind of feels like the next Jeff Goldblum, but nowhere near as like iconic as him, unless you're one of those people that love his stuff quite a bit. Oh, even then, like at least from what I know, Goldblum has been in much more recognizable roles than Mark Ruffalo is. People only remember him best for the Hulk. And you know, like since if you haven't seen like the Incredible Hulk movie, they don't really mention it that much. So if you like don't feel that aware of the recast, it doesn't really affect anything. Black Widow is more or less the same as we last saw her in Iron Man 2. Thor himself, I definitely feel, is a little more like tweaked, a few more humorous. You know, him pretty much being like a god that's interacting with mortal beings. I think the humor itself was a little better done for the first Thor movie compared to this. But at least you get a sense of the fact that they were trying to make a decent balance. Whereas everything since then has been much more comedic, especially with the likes of Thor Ragnarok and Fat Thor from Avengers Endgame. I know he's gotten himself like back in shape again, and it is cool to see him get some form of decent armor for Love and Thunder, but if anything to go by Taika Waititi, then I'm not really that surprised that we're still going to make him act like the bit of a clown. Captain America is more or less the same. You know, he's still trying to adapt to modern society. I think after that, he definitely started to become much more of a type of like cut clean leader type of guy that would occasionally throw in a joke here and there. Like I guess like if you were trying to find a comparison, the closest would probably be if Woody was written by someone that tried to make their own superhero movie, but they were doing it while working at a Starbucks and writing it for the CW, if that makes sense. I didn't really get that with Chris Evans in the first Captain America movie. Not so much for the same extent here, nor in Winter Soldier, but I got more of a sense of that for Age of Ultron onwards. Especially with him saying something like language. I don't know, it's just kind of like a thing that felt more like the typical one-liners they'd started to expand on. Him telling Hulk to smash was actually pretty good. It's a pretty clever thing. But, yeah, like Captain America kind of mixed on. You know, he's definitely like a well-beloved character, but I just don't see everything about him that makes me satisfied with him, if that makes sense. Then we got Hawkeye, who is pretty much, he's there. You know, people definitely get more excited for him because of Jeremy Renner, or they shit on him for certain things he said. But, yeah, he's alright. I mean, he does his thing. You definitely get more sense of, like, them trying to develop his character in other films, but whether it's him with his family in the Age of Ultron, or him as Ronin in Endgame, it's like, it is what it is. Nothing too exciting. I think that mind-blowing either. It's just alright. Nick Fury was pretty cool to watch, again, just because of the fact that like he was best known for being the guy that brings in all the Avengers together. I guess the approach to him trying to bring in these Avengers to go up against the common threat felt kind of cool. Granted, it was kind of like a case of him like, all right, we got you guys together, try and be nice to each other and solve this thing out. But admittedly, it felt more like a case of like less of the characters being willing to work together and more so just them working together so they can get paid. Even though they're going to get paid less than Iron Man because he's a rich motherfucker. Tell you the truth, like a small part of me kind of feels like they're trying to make a superhero movie for the people that watch The Office, which I'm not sure if I liked it or not. I mean, granted, The Office itself I don't hate, but at the same time, it does kind of feel like it's one of those things that you kind of like think about when it comes to the humor style that you go for. As for the story itself, it is like serviceable. You know, the character's going against Loki, who's returned from the last Thor movie, and fighting for the Tesseract. It is like it is a solid enough story. The music is forgettable though. The only thing I can remember is the Avengers theme, but I only remember like the certain part was like bum bum ba-dum. Like that's the only thing I remember more. It's so bland. It's like I don't hate it, but I don't like it either because it's nothing that memorable. Like I hate to be biased, but the Raimi Spider-Man theme as well as the X-Men theme for the movies were much more iconic and much more recognizable overall. I mean, granted, the X-Men music isn't as like well remembered as the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy music, but in terms of theme songs, they definitely have a much stronger approach than the Avengers theme. Even the 2003 Hulk movie had a much more iconic theme song, or at least one that's much more memorable than the Avengers theme, in spite of using a similar motif that Danny Elfman likes to recycle, which he's done for Multiverse of Madness. Shocking. Apart from all that, however, the first Avengers movie itself, I do think is one I have nostalgic remnants of, you know, being kind of like excited for the hype of the MCU, seeing all the heroes team up. There's also a time period when we got ourselves like The Dark Knight Rises, The Amazing Spider-Man, even Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance was there. It was fun, you know. It was definitely exciting. Sure, it was from a year where people thought the end of the world was going to happen or something stupid, but like it was nostalgic. It is exciting. It was something that was big. It's everywhere. But I'm going to be honest and say that it's kind of like setting aside all the rose-tinted nostalgia for things like the hype, the merchandise that was everywhere, and the nostalgic stuff that we saw from all the fan art and whatnot. It's a movie that holds up poorly. You know, it's not immediate trash like okay, if like this movie itself is more, if it was on a scale of like something that holds up like fine wine, it's something that's like extremely mediocre by today's standards and not worth being a fan of. You could say that this movie would be more or less in the same category as something like the 2003 Hulk movie, which even then, at least that movie had a little bit more of like a fleshed out characterization, in spite of it feeling slow. But I guess a more like a better example would be that it's in between something like that holds up very poorly, like the Christopher Reeve Superman movie, or something that's held up very well, like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. Again, trying not to be biased. I'd say it's in between, where it's something that doesn't hold up that well, but it's competent. It's serviceable. It was certainly a thing that they haven't done before. And to their credit, they managed to bring in quite a massive amount of people that are interested in this sort of style. Unfortunately, for the worst, it manages to be kind of an irritating approach, as we see later on. So after all that, we go from 2 years of normal MCU movies before we go into Age of Ultron. The Avengers are back, we get ourselves a new foe, and it's kind of a weird one to delve into. Now, you can definitely tell that the first Avengers movie was meant to be like a nice way to reel people into this sort of style and make them excited for the hype that's around when it comes to this massive team-up. Age of Ultron doesn't really get that sort of vibe. It's trying to be a more intricate, a much deeper movie, but unfortunately, it falls flat on its face for plenty of reasons. The visuals are much nicer this time around, and I do think this is the last time we got ourselves like nice CGI models for the likes of Iron Man's armor or the Incredible Hulk CGI. Which after that, both of which have gone like straight to trash in terms of the approach that they went for the visuals. The music by Danny Elfman is once again forgettable. Like, I don't know who did the music for the last movie, but you would think Danny Elfman, being a much more of a legendary musician, would at least try and make something that's memorable. Unfortunately, what we get with Age of Ultron doesn't sound anything that's worth remembering. You know, like, the only thing we still remember is just the Avengers theme. I mean, sure, I might have seen the movie once, and excluding any clips I've seen for certain things, like the Hulkbuster battle, which we'll get to. But the music is still flat and uninspired. Apart from all that, though, the characters are more or less the same as we got before. We've gotten things like visions that the characters experience where they're all dead. You know, the build-up for Thanos, which I should mention was in a post-credit scene for the first Avengers movie, getting like fans interested into wondering what's going to happen next. And new fans are going to wonder who this character is. It's a great way to bring in fans new and old. And it's something that was kind of cool back then. Age of Ultron tries to go for a similar style of, you know, trying to use the same magic with the first movie. But it's got plenty of other issues apart from what's already been mentioned, such as the way the story arcs work. Once again, I'd say it's trying to go for a much deeper story, and between things like the Hulk with Black Widow, Thor's own like side plot of his own like visions, the way Iron Man is depicted when it comes to his darker self, represented by Thanos, and the likes of Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch being involved. You can tell they're trying to make this a much darker film than what we got before. Unfortunately, it's just as flat and uninteresting as the first movie, but without any of the excuses I can give to that one. The problem is the fact that they try and cram in so much story that's involved, yet it just feels so lifeless. You know, like, I understand what they're trying to go for in theory, but the execution is just underwhelming overall. Like, okay, what's with the story arc between Hulk and Black Widow having romance? You can argue the fact that Black Widow herself might be the kind of girl that would like to just win over a new man's heart. You know, you get a sense that there's like a bit of romance between her and the other Avenger. I mean, you get a small bit of that, like Iron Man 2 with her and Tony, and a bit of that in Winter Soldier with Cap, I guess. But, like, now we have the Hulk. I mean, why is he trying to win over all the hearts of the male Avengers for? It's just something that doesn't really make any sense. It's like they're trying to go for, like, this, you know, this sort of, like, this approach that this, like, spy herself has a bit of a human heart. So to prove that she's not that cold of a person. Or the Hulk is actually this, like, still this gentle human who can't be controlled easily. He must find something that can keep him calm. It's like, I don't get it. What's it trying to convey? It's got this weird undertone as well. You know, it's trying to bring in this weird romance thing that ultimately just falls flat because of Joss Whedon being Joss Whedon. I mean, before the Flashlight fell on Wonder Woman's boobs in JUSTUS, that piece of shit version of the movie we're supposed to have gotten, that being the Snyder Cut, which erases all of that nonsense from Joss Whedon, simply because that was the version we were supposed to have gotten. I mean, remember that scene from JUSTUS, as much as I don't want to, where it depicts, like, the Flash falling on Wonder Woman's breasts? We got a precursor to that with the freaking Age of Ultron movie. And the fact that we not only have, like, freaking Danny Elfman recycling motifs for his music, but we get Joss Whedon recycling his own stupid-ass jokes. And it's even worse with the JUSTUS stuff, but it's just as bad with the original Age of Ultron version with Bruce Banner and Natasha Romanoff. Like, come on, dude. So much for being a feminist, but you're trying to bring in jokes like that. It's like, shut the fuck up, Joss. Thankfully, he's been getting under recent fire for all the stuff he's done. Fuck that motherfucker. But, like, it just doesn't work. And everything else, like, I remember watching a review from Glenn Webb on one of the figures from Marvel Legends. He mentioned about how there was like a deleted story plot involving Thor, and I was like, oh yeah, that was supposed to happen. It might have made the story make more sense. But it's just one of those things that you kind of realize that when you're trying to delete something that's actually going to be very crucial, you get yourself a bit of a nonsensical movie that doesn't really add up to anything. And Age of Ultron is no exception because, oh boy, does it not even try to work in the slightest bit. I also got to talk about Ultron himself. I don't mind his design. At this point, I kind of feel like the MCU is trying to be its own thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be like the Marvel comics, but if you're gonna say, oh, like it's like the Marvel comics, meanwhile DC ain't, like, no. They're both trying to deviate themselves to an extent. Doesn't matter if the comic accuracy is one thing. What matters more is they make it feel like it's something organic, and that the writing's good. And Ultron's design, while yes, very Bayverse influenced, doesn't really feel as transitionary or as transcending as a character. Because he's just like them trying to mimic the success Loki had. Because he won over a lot of girls that loved him on Tumblr. And he was kind of charismatic and kind of charming in the first Avengers movie. Yet trying to mimic the success of him in Age of Ultron was kind of lackluster. You get a sense that he's supposed to be like this different antagonist. And him being a dark reflection of Tony Stark doesn't help either. Because it feels like Tony Stark and Loki were both working on the same robot that combines both their elements so that way they can get the best of both worlds for all the fangirls that love him. So they decide, okay, let's just combine like our elements together. And it doesn't really work all that well. Like, I know it's the MCU trying to be like having these sort of like humans that are sympathetic to an extent. They even had like sort of like sub-theme of like Ultron being similar to Pinocchio. Remember that trailer where we got ourselves a version of I Have No Strings on Me? Because Pinocchio, it's very much like Pinocchio. Disney owns Marvel. Walt Disney Company's a conglomerate octopus. It's just... It's something that works on paper, but the execution is just, like, flat. Much like the rest of the movie. And don't even get me started on Quicksilver. Scarlet Witch, her living along makes sense because she's more commonly known to be an Avenger. And it was a kind of a good compromise because her brother, Quicksilver, pretty much dying in this film is pretty much a great way for Fox to continue using the much superior X-Men version. I mean, seriously, at the time, like, Age of Ultron came out, the Fox Quicksilver character was, like, brief in Days of Future Past, but his scene was much more iconic and much better done than anything that the Age of Ultron version of Quicksilver had. Remember that scene, like, when Quicksilver was actually dodging all the bullets in Days of Future Past in slow motion, and he had a blast doing it? Compare that to what we got with Age of Ultron, where Quicksilver gets shot by a bunch of bullets and he's dead. It's pathetic. That's something that the Flash learned in the Snyder Cut, because the fact that he got shot at least once by one of the Parademons and still survived is kind of proof that he's playing smart and not playing hard. As was the case with our Fox Quicksilver, as he learned a similar thing before the Flash did. And that's something that does not apply to MCU Quicksilver. Poor sucker. Oh yeah, and also we get ourselves a bit of like a War Machine, which was weird. I don't think he was in the first Avengers movie. Yeah, probably just them trying to hype him up for Iron Man 3, probably. And it's kind of like a thing I gotta mention. People act like I know one person was commenting on the fact that Avengers was kind of like a not very diverse movie. You have like one or two female characters, and in terms of people of color, you at least have like one person that's not white. That's something that you got to bring up because if you're a company like the Walt Disney that's trying to be obsessed with diversity, but that's not really something that applies with the Avengers. If you're not trying to go for diversity and trying to make it as a gimmick, then that's understandable. If you're trying to use like specific characters, fine. But at the same time, it is kind of amusing that this began the trend where Disney tried to be obsessed with diversity, yet you have very few signs of like female characters and little to no presence of non-white individuals for the posters, at least until Infinity War, in terms of the Avengers stuff. But apart from that, we also got to comment on the way they handle things like, the battle between Hulk and the Hulkbuster, which was cool, but again, double standards that, certain characters can't destroy cities, but it's okay for them to do it. And of course, the fact that sure it was in a fictional city, but you kind of feel bad for all the casualties. I know some people be like, oh my god, the Avengers are like extremist terrorists. I mean, they're trying to do what they can to prevent damage, but at the same time, it is laughable how people ignore that but shit on other characters that were being as destructive, although not as intentional. But the funniest thing is just the way, like, Thor and Hulk fly away, so that way they can have their own adventures while we have the fairly mediocre Captain America Civil War movie, which I hate. I don't plan on reviewing it anytime soon. Basically, if you want to think my thoughts on Captain America Civil War, it's the opposite of what I think about Batman v Superman. I love BVS, hate Civil War. So let's move on to a movie that's actually a little better than Civil War, that being Infinity War. Okay, so Infinity War, I first thought was just going to be obnoxious in your face when it comes to the hype. I mean, it was exciting in a way that we're getting Thanos involved. We're also getting, like, things like the other characters teaming up. It's going to be a massive fight. We got Black Panther, with CGI issues aside and some humor aside. It was a decent film overall, not too shabby. There was a lot that was intriguing with Infinity War. Was it 100% perfect? No, but I did have a bit of a blast watching it. It wasn't, like, my favorite thing ever, but I will admit and say that it was something that I did enjoy to an extent. I feel like I kind of repeated that, but anyways. Like, Infinity War definitely sets the bar high when it comes to the fact that Thanos shows up and beats the crap out of Hulk. It's kind of sucky that, like, the Hulk himself just chickens out, and we just stick with Bruce Banner for the rest of the movie, which is kind of annoying because I don't like the new Bruce Banner. But at least it does prove that Thanos himself is a massive threat. Although I do remember in the comics that Thanos would usually try to avoid the Hulk because the angrier the Hulk gets, the stronger it becomes. So, there's pretty much that. It is one of those things where you just see the Avengers building up, It was after the events of Civil War, so of course they got to come back and go up against a massive threat. It does a decent job of explaining what happened since then, but really, like, I don't really care much about Civil War, nor Homecoming, nor Ragnarok, so fuck those movies. Infinity War itself does a decent job of like, reefing up with what happened beforehand. And, apart from certain things like the humor between the Guardians, or MCU Spider-Man making references, and all the stuff like, where's Gamora? Who's Gamora? What's this or that, whatever. Or Star-Lord just being a stupid-ass motherfucker. There are things I did enjoy about the movie. From the way, like, the Black Order shows up and became a massive threat for the Avengers, to the team reuniting for a bit as you go up against a massive threat. Annoyingly, Hulk was supposed to be shown, but they just teased us with all the merchandise. Like, there was a scene where, like, the Hulk would have busted out from the Hulkbuster armor, getting his strength back, and just kicking ass once again. But we just cut that out, and we just get ourselves this really hideous shot of, like, Bruce Banner being like, oh, you guys are screwed now with the Hulkbuster armor. It just looked kind of bad. Like, it definitely shows the fact that, in spite of all the budget being put in a movie like this, the CGI for the MCU movies has gotten worse over time. But, there are things I did enjoy from Infinity War. I like the action, as I mentioned before. Seeing Thor, the Guardians team up was cringy at times, but it's also cool at times. And that can sum up my current thoughts on the MCU, if I'm being honest. Seeing the battle between Thanos and some of the other Avengers was not too bad, especially when he got all the stones. It's like, you don't know what he's going to do. If you never read the comics, you probably, like, have no idea what he would do. If you're aware of Thanos, the character, like, you're kind of, like, interested, will he actually win? Will he lose? Will he, like, do the snap? Because he was best known to use that in the older comics. And even then, like, we don't know who's going to win, who's going to survive. Because in a war like this, it's significantly bring, like, quite a lot of casualties. Which is thankfully the case compared to the shitty-ass Civil War movie. The other thing that definitely, like, surprised fans everywhere was the fact that the Avengers actually lost a battle. You would think Thor was actually going to, like, aim for the head, but no. One snap, and he's done. well, Thor is pretty much done in terms of like him admitting defeat, but a handful of characters are dead. You know, like the Winter Soldier turns to dust, Falcon turns to dust, Groot turns to dust, Star-Lord, you know, like everyone else that wasn't prominent around Nick Fury turns to dust near the end of the movie before he calls on Captain Marvel. And we saw a brief scene of that with like MCU Spider-Man, like Tom Holland Spider-Man. He was like, "Oh, Mr. Stark, I don't feel so good. I don't want to go." You know, a lot of like people cried at that scene. And for some twisted reason, I was like happy for it because I didn't like his incarnation. I kind of find it a little more tolerable now with No Way Home, although that's not 100% perfect. But like, I was happy for that. Like, I didn't like Tom Holland's Spider-Man. I just found it kind of like obsessed with Iron Man to be a stupid thing. And the fact that like I was more excited for like Insomniac Spider-Man as well as Spider-Verse and the Venom movie, that just put me in a really good mood. Of course, he came back for Endgame. Like, of course he would. Especially with Far From Home being the next movie to come out after Homecoming. But, yeah. Like, Infinity War wasn't that bad. It's got some issues still. There's things I don't like, but there's things I did like. And while my reception of that is kind of mixed, I would honestly say that I didn't hate it entirely. When I saw it later on, was just something that kind of made me think, you know, that wasn't too bad. I enjoyed it. Like, I'm not going to say it's like my top 10 favorite things of all time, but for the things I did like, they were enough to make me satisfied to an extent. Then Endgame came, and despite being like super promising and super epic, has tons and tons of issues. So essentially, from what I can gather from the last time I saw the movie, which was years ago, that Snap pretty much had everyone like move on from their lives after they kill Thanos and find him, and regrouping for a bit with everyone else. Which I remember one time, like a few days ago, I woke up like remembering that a former acquaintance tried to scare off someone that he hated so badly, although he wasn't any like better in terms of behavior. He was like trying to troll him by saying that the Avengers were dead by showing like something that would upset him, but like, no, dude, the original 6 were still alive. And as far as I remember, like Rocket Raccoon and War Machine were still around too. I'm pretty sure other people like Nova, like was it Nova? The bald-haired girl that's had something to do with like the Guardians, and Carol were still around as well. Well, she just popped up. But like the original 6 at least were not the Avengers that died. They eventually did like get phased out of the MCU in different ways, but they were not dead in Infinity War. Sorry for that off tangent thing. It's just something I remember because like even though I'm not a big MCU fan, I know that Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, Captain America, Black Widow, and Hawkeye were still alive during the events of Infinity War. In Endgame, like, Black Widow dies, Hawkeye is pretty much now in the shadows, Hulk is a green Shrek wannabe, Captain America goes into the past and now is retirement, living as an old man that looks like Joe Biden for some reason. Iron Man's dead, and Thor is now a fat motherfucker who then loses weight in Avengers Endgame's like subsequent movies. Well, by subsequent movies I mean like a shit ton of other films before Love and Thunder. But up until then, he was like playing Fortnite with Korg, and that was stupid. But yeah, like the original 6 were still alive. Like you get a sense that they were building up this sort of thing because this feels like a bit of like a one last time thing for the original 6. You know, the team that started it all for the Avengers approach for the Marvel Cinematic Universe back then. It was something that was kind of nice, although the rest of the movie was filled with a ton of problems. So Tony Stark decided, hey, in spite of me having a family and us moving on from the Snap 5 years later, why don't we try getting everybody back? Even though that would cause a lot of problems, like where would they be placed? How are you going to resolve everything? Are you going to go back in time? Are you going to try and do anything? Of course, the stones were destroyed, so that means that would be impossible to do. So they thought, okay, let's go back in time. They think we can try and like outdo Back to the Future? No problem. We'll just go with it that way. And it doesn't work unless they try and explain as much as they can. You know what the problem is, though? The Russos, God bless them, they just keep on explaining shit as if their audiences were stupid. It's like, okay, they went through this sort of thing, and then, like, Tony Stark decided, okay, how about if we try and save the bad guys? I, like, put one of these stones up my ass and tell Scott Lang to try and do something similar with Thanos. If you know the reference, like, you probably might be remembering just how obnoxious that meme was, even though it's kind of funny. But, yeah. The Russos kept on explaining everything, and it still didn't help by the fact that, you know, the time-traveling stuff for Avengers Endgame was not the best. They tried to like, get certain things like the stones from certain time periods or certain locations, and as effective as it was in them making them win, since they would then get the stones, it still doesn't help by the fact that like they made up with past versions of themselves that would actually not like make things seem consistent or coherent. And of course, the Thanos they face off against isn't the same Thanos that they met back in the normal time period before they killed him. So it just kind of loses a bit of the weight. It's like they're trying to prevent him from attacking, but at the same time, it's like it could have been much more effective if his subconsciousness somehow went to the other Thanos, so he can at least remember them and be like, "You think you could get rid of me so easily? I'm still around, motherfuckers." But nah, they think people will just eat up. And I mean, the movie made like $2 more billion bucks. So like, what else can I expect? But yeah, it was something that's just like I get what they're trying to go for again, but at the same time, like between all these extreme attempts at explaining shit and the lack of satisfaction with the end results, I just feel like it could have been better done if they tried to find a way to do it in the present time period. You know, Thanos try and come back and be a threat once again. But nah, we don't get that. The final battle itself is just like a massive approach and having so many characters returning. You know, it was like on one hand it is cool, and I bet your ass that a lot of people in the movie theaters are excited for that. But at the same time, with the way the color grading works and just how many people there are, it's kind of gets a little hard to catch up in the sea of gray and brown. People complain about like the CGI battles for Attack of the Clones, but at least you can tell the difference between the clones and the droids in terms of character designs, even the vehicles too. Like people like, unless you're a boomer that's still like a Star Wars original trilogy purist, you would definitely know the difference between the good guys and bad guys. Whereas with Endgame, it just feels like because everything just blends in so much, it's like, what are we focusing on really? But of course, the best known thing is the fact that Iron Man does a snap and dies, which is one of the most like surprising things about the movie. And people are like, "Oh, we're gonna pass on the torch like the new Avengers stuff." But honestly, I'd rather this be like the definitive conclusion to the MCU. At this point, like we already know for a fact that with like all the Disney Plus shows and the movies coming out, there ain't no way they're going to like cancel the MCU. Like they're going to make movies still. We're going to get like Iron Man 50 in the year 2978 with a lookalike Robert Downey Jr. just like trying to fight against the telephone booth. We're still going to get MCU movies. Like don't try and go anywhere, buddy. So yeah, like Avengers, the series itself has been very notorious by people for the amount of hype it's gotten, but at the same time, like there's been certain people that just don't like how much it's overtaken cinema, because not only did it try to like overtake Marvel Comics with everything almost trying to fit in with the same aesthetics as the MCU, unless it's something specific like Marvel Legends, but it's also made the MCU like overtake cinema. Very few brands, unless they're ones made by Disney, can survive in theaters making a lot of money, because people are pretty much being like shills towards a massive corporation, although they like to shit on other companies, despite them like somewhat being better than Disney in terms of their practices. And of course, we also have to deal with the nonsense that is the way the fans are. Where it's like, if you don't like the MCU, then you're this massive like clown, or your opinion doesn't matter, or you're like a DC shill. That definitely put like a bit of a sour note on my thoughts on not just the MCU franchise, but also the cape shit in general, which is pretty sad because I remember back in 2012, like before I met all like the social media sites and all the forums, like I was pretty happy to look into the MCU. But when I started delving into like social media and other fan sites, I was like realizing the fact that the fan bases are like kind of disgusting. Between them trying to like their opinion matters more than others, and the way they like to act like corporate shills, yet shit on other companies, it's just like kind of like sad to look at. I can remember just like how irritating it was to look at everyone feel like, oh my god, we gotta support the MCU, we gotta make all these tickets. It's like they're gonna complain about other people for liking certain things, yet they're gonna keep on watching like Avengers Endgame 28 times just so they can beat Avatar. They're not gonna be rewarded for anything. I mean, sure they're gonna get clout by all the actors, but even then, like they're just making fools out of themselves just to support a company that's gonna keep on churning out product. Which reminds me of the case when it comes to things like the way Walt Disney operates as a company, and sort of like more and more details regarding how things are with the fans or like people that try and connect with Marvel Studios, like Brandon Davis, Randy Sigmore, and whatnot. And of course, things like the way certain individuals are, like James Gunn with the way he's been noted or commented on during like court sessions or hearings involving him being in a pedo-themed party. Like, you get a sense that it's like that people just ignore all this stuff because they prefer to support the brand. And yeah, sure, you can definitely support a brand, no problem, even if they're not like the best thing ever. But at the same time, like, if you're gonna call out to companies like that, you got to call them out in general if they're doing something wrong. So, while the Avengers series itself may not be something that I'm like really that interested in revisiting because I'm not a big fan of the movies themselves, although I will see certain scenes, I will give the Avengers series credit for at least showing me that even if something seems like it's going to be full of hype, you also have to remember to ask questions and not always consume product and not always be excited for next product, as was the case for a lot of Disney shills that keep on shielding product and being excited to consume more product. And that's quite a lot of a ramble if you ask me. God, I need to take a bit of a break. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Avengers series, and well, I'll probably give my own thoughts on Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness at some point, so bye.